All right, everybody, welcome. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Professor Sean Stokes. Sean Stokes. So everybody, welcome Sean Stokes.
It seems I got a promotion to professor pretty quickly, so I'm not sure about that. No, so I'm the I'm the research director. Hey, close enough. No, I'm the research director at the Rodale Institute's Midwest Organic Center. Let's see. Let's adjust our little angle here, so not give me a little more room to wander. And so I want to talk today about crop diversity in the Midwest. And so Bob invited me down here, and I, kind of have a general idea of what, the goals of these meetings that you guys are having, and I want to come at it from a little bit of a different angle. So full disclosure, I did give this exact webinar about 2 weeks ago on the Rodale's website, but there's a lot of overlap, and essentially what I want to do today is set the stage for why we need investment into improving our markets for things that aren't corn and soybeans. We live in an ocean of corn and soybeans out here, and our path forward that I want to talk about a little bit is through crop diversification, through stuff like small grains, and kind of talk about at the end, why, because it is so beneficial to have diversity, what's lacking, and that's where there's some overlap here. So bear with me as we start with kind of some background, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that's been done in Iowa and a little bit what we're doing at Rodale, but really leave some time for discussion as well, and really try to help bridge that gap, because I come from the producer and the research side of things, and a lot of you guys are coming at it from the processors, the sellers of flour and the millers and this other side. And as I had a great tour of Breadtopia this morning, we were kind of talking about there's this gap, that people are not talking on the supply side and the demand side, and there's the buyer and the seller side, and what we're trying to do is really bridge that gap and talk about why crop diversity in the Midwest is important. And so, in the interest of leaving as much time as possible for some questions and discussion as well, I might skip through a couple of these slides that were tailored for a little bit of a different purpose, but we will start with a little background here. And so what this slide is showing is that back in the 1940s and 50s, 2/3 of this farmland was used to be growing small grains and hay. The other third was roughly corn, but you can see over time, and this is the Raccoon River Basin specifically, so outside of Des Moines, but this trend is very similar across the Midwest. I just like this figure from Jerry Hatfield's paper. But you can see over the course of time, as we've gotten kind of closer to present day, we're really not growing any small grains and hay anymore. Like, there's a little bit out there here and there, but it's really less than 10% of our crop production in the Midwest. And as we all know, it's corn and soybeans now. So you can see that over the course of time, that production has grown. The acres of corn have stayed pretty similar over the years. It's really the soybean production that has overtaken in terms of land use, the small grains and the hay that used to be grown more commonly. So you can see this figure kind of shows the same thing, dark green being the corn belt. So we got 20 million plus acres of corn and soybeans, and then roughly 1 million acres of, depending on the state, whether it's Iowa with hay or Illinois has some more wheat. Similar trend across the Midwest, where it's 90 to 95% corn and soybeans, and then the rest is a little bit of sporadic stuff here and there. So what has that done over the course of the past 50 and 60 years? And so that's what these figures are kind of going to show here, is that once we started shifting this production system back in the 1960s, you can see here this figure shows that we had this increase in nitrate concentrations in our water supply, and that's still a common problem to this day as well. And so the first easy conclusion to jump to is, well, okay, more nitrogen in means more nitrogen out. But it's not a simple answer. And as this figure shows here, that actually the nitrogen production or the nitrogen applications peaked in the 80s and actually has kind of tailed off a little bit since then. The rough math here these days is most farmers are putting on 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre for their corn crop. And it's probably getting up closer to 300 pounds per acre, but most won't actually admit that they're putting that much on. But what I'm getting at is it's not that simple of an answer, because you can see that our nitrate concentrations were still increasing even as our fertilizer rate was going down. And so really it speaks to this systemic problem, this degradation of our soil health. And this is just one symptom of that problem. And so the bigger question is, and this is why we're having these meetings and we're doing research and we're all talking about this subject, is our status quo sustainable? And it's pretty clear that at this point it's not, and we need to be doing something differently. There was a great study from UMass Amherst that showed soil erosion is happening at a rate of 2 millimeters a year ever since the Great Plains got plowed up for agriculture about 160 years ago. That's about a foot of topsoil. You can see in this picture right here, that's just an average. There's places where there's 2 to 3 feet of topsoil being eroded. And at that rate, that's some of those UN FAO projections that have talked about our topsoil degrading in 50 to 60 years. Like, it's not a scare tactic. If we keep eroding it at 100 times the rate that we're building it, we're not going to have it for much longer. There's increased nutrient leaching. I love some of the work that Chris Jones does. He gets a bad rap from some people, but I love his work with water quality from the University of Iowa, formerly University of Iowa. And I got these numbers from one of the Substacks that he wrote earlier this year that was talking about May and June alone in Iowa. 350 million pounds of nitrogen was lost to our waterways in May and June. 350 million pounds. By the end of the year, we could have over 1 billion pounds leave our soils and enter our waterways. That's our drinking water, that's our fishing lakes, that's our swimming holes. That is why that water is full of algae. And it's not just an Iowa problem. That water ends up in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's eutrophication in the dead zone down there. And then on top of that, it's more than just environmental health, it's human health. The Corn Belt has some of the most additional cancers attributed to pesticides across the whole country. As many of you probably know, Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the whole country, and corn is this top pesticide using crop out of all of the crops. And you can see this figure here on the right. It's from a recent risk assessment that was published only a couple months ago. And so I want to quote exactly from this. So you can see here, the dark blue is where there's the most, I'll read directly from it so I'm not messing up their conclusion here, but it's the most additional cancer cases in a single year that can be attributed to a difference in pesticide use patterns when controlling for all other factors. Essentially, they controlled for all these things like obesity and smoking and all these other risks of cancer, and they determined that in this area there's, substantially more cancer cases that are attributed to pesticides than any other place in the country. And I quote from their paper, in their conclusion, they said that the impact of pesticide use on cancer incidence may rival that of smoking. And so why is that? Well, corn and soybeans take up 60% of the total pounds of active ingredients applied. So yes, there's a lot of glyphosate, but there's fungicides, there's insecticides, there's herbicides, there's all of them. And 60% of the pesticides in this country are going towards those two crops. And like we just showed, majority of those crops are being grown here in Iowa and the Midwest. And I had this realization as I was making these slides. There's a really disturbing pattern here. And these are two independent figures. One is showing our corn production on the side, on the left side from the USDA, and one is showing the cancer cases attributed to pesticide use. And you can see the very disturbingly similar trend in the coloring of these two areas from these two independent studies. So, Bayer and Monsanto will be the first ones to tell you that it's correlation, not causation. But, there gets to be a point when all this data is pointing towards this correlation, and we really, have to think twice about what we're doing. But it's not just human health, it's not just environmental health, it's profitability for the farmers. The average corn input cost in 2023 was $550 an acre. And yes, that has gone down a little bit in the past year, as you can see with fertilizer costs. But these costs don't even include the cost of land use, fuel, other incidental costs as well. This is just fertilizer, seeds, and pesticides. And there's just kind of an irony right now that we're about to have one of the best corn crops in history. I mean, average yield's going to be potentially 210 bushels an acre, and yet the corn price is below $4 a bushel. And so the farmers are about to have record yield and have done a great job producing their corn, yet most of them are maybe not even going to break even at this point and lose money. And so it kind of leads us to the point of like, what are we doing? Like, what is our path forward? That the farmer can be so great at growing something yet not make money doing it. And it's a little head scratching to me. But it leads us to here, to input reduction. And that really is our path forward and our ultimate goal. Because input reduction is about reducing inputs that cause soil and ecological health problems, causing human health problems, and they're also causing problems to the farm's profitability as well. And so how do we get to input reduction by still maintaining our crop yield? And that's where we get to crop diversity. And that's where our path forward now is that we need to get out of these alternating corn and soybean monoculture rotations. They're detrimental to all aspects of what we were just talking about, from human and environmental health to farm profitability, to just rotate back and forth between those two crops. And so it comes down to soil health. And so soil health is commonly defined as by the USDA as the continued capacity of soil to function as this vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So it's more than just growing that one crop in the ground. Soil goes from under my feet to worldwide impacts. When you talk about greenhouse gases and eutrophication in the Gulf of Mexico, that's 1,000 miles away. And it all comes back to this healthy soil that's going to regulate water flow, it's going to filter pollutants, it's going to cycle nutrients, really thinking about soil as a sponge. A healthy soil is a sponge that holds water and holds nutrients, and then helps cycle those nutrients, and it sustains life. 95% of our food is directly or indirectly dependent on the soil, and the carbon that you can sequester into that soil or that you want to keep in the soil is the glue that holds this whole system together. And so you hear a lot about regenerative agriculture and about soil health, and they're really the same thing. Regenerative agriculture is an outcome. It's not a process. Regenerative agriculture is about improving just one outcome really specifically, and that's the soil health. And just improving the ecosystem that is that soil and the things that depend on that soil. And so if you have an outcome that improves that soil, that's a regenerative system. And so all of this starts, when you have regenerative agriculture, all of it starts with crop diversity there, one of the core principles of regenerative agriculture. And I'll tell you why it starts with crop diversity, and this is where we're going to get into why we need to start growing some more small grains. And I like to use small grains or like winter grains as a great example of how just doing that one thing of adding a third crop into a corn and soybean rotation opens the door for the rest of these regenerative principles. Because when you plant that small grain in the winter, we're about to plant small grains on our farm actually right now. I would say that Drew, the farm manager, is probably up there north of Cedar Rapids right now planting our winter wheat and our hybrid rye. And so when you plant that after you harvest your soybeans, or your corn potentially, you now have living roots in the ground all winter. And those living roots are holding the soil in place, you're keeping that soil covered a little bit, and then they come up really fast in the spring. And because you have those living roots in there, you're reducing your nitrate runoff because that soil is still covered and there's something there to actually hold on to that nitrate. And then with a small grain, you're harvesting it in July. And now you've gotten your cash crop out of the field in July, when soybeans and corn are staying in the field until October or November. And you have this, August, September, October, maybe into November, depending on the year, of this 3 to 4 months of a growing season to now grow something else. Some farmers might double crop and plant something like buckwheat and try to get a second crop out of there. A lot of farmers are going to plant a cover crop. You can even underseed that cover crop like clover under a small grain. And now you have an opportunity to grow a cover crop that's not winter rye. Yes, it's great when farmers are planting that winter rye and it's there from November to March or April and then they terminate it. But they're really missing an opportunity to grow other crops like nitrogen fixers that can really build the nitrogen in the system and provide other benefits. And so by growing that small grain, you now allow for this cover crop to establish in a couple months and really get the full benefits of a diverse cover crop because you've now taken your cash crop out of the field in July. And so now you've got your soil covered, you got living roots in the ground year round, and you can potentially integrate livestock. A lot of cover crops can be grazed by livestock. You're not just growing it for the fun of it, you're getting benefits there, and there's value when you can feed that to an animal, a goat, cows, whatever you want. Hay it, do whatever you need with it. So there's still value. You could still consider that cover crop a cash crop. And then when you're doing all that, you're minimizing your soil disturbance as well. And so that's where it all starts with that crop diversity, because with the corn and soybeans, you're really limited in these regenerative principles. So I want to talk a little bit. Oh, and so I guess the point being too that that's where it comes. The input reduction starts with. Let me go back one slide here. So this is where it ties in with input reduction though, because it's minimizing soil disturbance is really the most important thing we can do. If you're an organic farmer, you're probably tilling a decent amount because you can't spray and you got to till for weed control. And that's one of the biggest criticisms of organic farming is there's a lot of tillage in those systems and disrupting the soil. But there's more than just physical soil disturbance. A conventional farmer who's no-till, that's great. They're not physically disturbing the soil, but they're disturbing it chemically. They're disturbing it biologically. When you put a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer on a soil like a conventional farmer is doing, it chemically disrupts the soil aggregates. And so those aggregates that are acting like the little mini sponge within the soil are now falling apart because of that inorganic fertilizer. And so there's chemical disruptions that happen and there's biological disruptions that can happen in these conventional systems. So it's about minimizing soil disturbance in any of those ways, physical, chemical, or biological. And that's where it comes down to reducing our inputs as well. And that's where I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here at Iowa State and this conventional system that's showing crop diversity. This study was started in 2003 by Matt Liebman and is still ongoing. But essentially what they did is they took a 2-year rotation that's status quo, so average fertilizer, average herbicides, corn and soybeans, and they compared that to a 3-year rotation with a small grain and a clover in there, and then they reduced their inputs and added manure, and then they also did a 4-year rotation where they added a small grain, and then they had a pasture year, same thing, reduced their manure, or reduced their inputs and added manure in as well. And what this figure is showing, so these are normalized values. So the very outside here is the maximum value, and then these little tick marks are kind of the percentage of the rotations that of that maximum value. So you can see the solid black line is the 2-year rotation, the dashed line is the 3-year rotation, and the gray line is the 4-year rotation. And so if you look here, you can see with profitability that all of those systems, the 2-year, the 3-year, the 4-year rotation, all had similar profits per acre. Even though you're growing the corn less frequently, you're still maintaining that profit. And so you can see here, you're maintaining even higher yields. And so why that is though, is because you're reducing the costs, you're reducing your inputs. You're making the corn year more profitable, you're making the whole system more profitable because you're reducing your expenses. And that's what diversity does, is it improves the soil health, it improves the nutrient cycling. You get the soil acting like a soil should be and not dependent on these synthetic inputs that we're putting into it. And then you can see here, you're actually way less energy being used in those longer rotations, 90% less synthetic nitrogen, 90% less herbicides, you're getting freshwater toxicity reductions as well. And so you're maintaining your profit, but you're also having all these benefits of less stuff going in there, which is great for the environment, it's great for human health as well. So really this is a conventional system with regenerative practices. And so the same thing's being done at Iowa State to compare conventional and organic rotations as well. So very similar setup, your basic corn and soybean conventional rotation being compared to a 3-year and 4-year organic rotation. And so very similar results as well. So you're getting, more organic carbon, more total nitrogen, more potassium and calcium in those diverse organic rotations, and your soybeans even have significantly higher protein content as well. And the whole system, the whole organic rotation is then $50 to $400 more profitable than that conventional rotation. And so what we've done up at the Midwest Center for Rodale is we've started a study, this is a picture of it, that's based on this and saying, okay, these 2 studies have shown how beneficial these crop rotations are. They only used oats in their crop rotation. And we want to build on that and show that it's not just like one small grain. We want to give farmers as much flexibility as possible. You know, you guys had 15 different small grains I saw at Breadtopia earlier today. And that's kind of the point here, is that it's not about like, oh, you have to just grow oats or wheat. It's about just pick one of them. Like find whatever market you have, what equipment you have, what's your climate, find something that works for your system and do it. And so that's what we're demonstrating here is we have these 4-year rotations of corn and soybeans and then small grains and our more diverse crop to really give that flexibility and show that it doesn't matter which one of them you choose. It's just about adding that diversity. And so the main objective of this, we've called it our diverse systems trial. It's going to be a long-term study that we're in year 1 right now, and we're going to continue this on for years to come. And it's to evaluate the impact of these diverse crop rotations, but also livestock grazing, and evaluating the impact of that on soil health and farm profitability. So really checking all the boxes of regenerative management, and then in our case, regenerative organic management. Because what happens is these diverse crop rotations and the livestock integration naturally disrupt these weed and pest cycles. These crops compete differently with these weeds. And so when you diversify that, the weeds get out-competed and you don't need to apply as much herbicide. Or you have better disruption of nematodes in your soybeans, and so you don't have to apply as much inputs there, or other bacterias or pests. And so you're also building soil fertility with nitrogen fixers. And so you're applying less fertilizer. And so when you're applying less inputs, you're reducing the risk in these systems. And so that's the point here, is that we're going to be looking at profitability and soil health, but they're very interconnected. But looking at it over the course of an entire rotation. Yeah, corn is always going to be the most profitable crop, you know, at least anytime in the near future. But it's about less inputs into that and looking at the whole rotation together, and you can maintain that profitability over the course of it. Even if your oats or your wheat is bringing in a smaller margin, it balances out because it's building soil fertility and having good competition for that corn and soybean year. And so this is our crop rotation that we're doing. And so we have corn and then followed by soybeans and then our small grains. So we're growing winter wheat, hybrid rye, and oats. And then each one of those, you can see the numbers correspond to what follows what. We'll be then growing spring peas, have a pasture year, and then grow some millet as well. So essentially like getting some good nitrogen fixation out of the peas and pasture. But again, it's all about flexibility, that, you know, if you're down here in this area that you have a grain buyer, you can maybe pick one of these grains to buy, or maybe you're up in northern Iowa close to Purus and they're, you know, a big buyer of field peas. It's really that flexibility that we're trying to demonstrate. And then we're having our livestock grazing into these systems as well. And that's really a novel component of this study, is that everyone talks about how great it is to integrate livestock, but there's really hasn't been a ton of research showing the long-term impacts of livestock grazing. And so what we want to do, and you can see it here, so what we've done is we have these rectangles here. So this is our diverse crop. So we've got our pasture, our peas, and our millet. And then we split that right down the middle and put a fence up, and we graze the livestock on half of that plot. It's called a split plot design. So essentially everything is identical between these two things except for one thing, and that's the manure source. So we're going to have grazing on half of it, and then we're going to have, annual grazing on half of it, and then once out of every 4 years, before the corn, we'll apply composted manure. So is it about just the manure and it doesn't matter where it comes from, or is it actually the grazing component of the livestock that is providing different benefits than just composted manure? And that's what we're really trying to show here. And you can see this picture really showing the difference between this plot that was grazed and then the one that was ungrazed. And that'll happen. We're currently grazing 3 steers on the farm right now. There is Chuck, Peter, and George. And we just use these temporary electric fences. We have a float in our water to kind of keep that continuously filled. Very low maintenance, easy to set up those fences and move them around. And so, let's see, where are we on time here? So In the interest of time here, so kind of essentially, I'll skip through some of these results. These are kind of year one, but essentially what it's showing is that we have very low soil health here. This field was conventional corn and soybeans for decades, and so the soil health is pretty low in there. Our water infiltration rates are really low. They're about 0.6 inches per hour for our infiltration rate. And these are the kind of things that, as we practice these regenerative principles, will improve our soil health. And then this is a direct reflection of our soil health, is how quickly that water infiltrates in there. So that's less erosion, more water going into the system. And this year is a perfect example of why it's important, because we get all this rain in the spring and it's a super wet spring. If you don't have good infiltration, that water is running right off the surface and into our waterways, or it's taking your soil to, downstream somewhere you don't want it to. But then if you're not getting that water infiltrating into the soil and your soil's not acting like a good sponge to really hold that water, now when all of a sudden we hit a drought at the end of the summer, now we're really desperate for that water. So we're seeing these fluctuations of weather. And so it's these extremes is what is becoming more normal. And that's where the infiltration rate and the water holding capacity of the soil is super important, and why we need to be doing these regenerative principles that can build it up. So we had some initial harvests. Harvests were pretty low for our small grains. We're still kind of working into it. We'll as we work into the rotation, we'll kind of get some of our weed problem out of the way and have some better fertility. Corn and soybeans just got harvested. Corn is about to be harvested. And you can see here, this is spreading some compost before our corn. So this is some of our management stuff. I won't bore you with that right now. We'll get to the good stuff here in a sec. But you can see the weed control here. And so there's a ton of lamb's quarter in this field, but these small grains do a really great job of competing with it. And I like this picture because this is I believe it's wheat, one of our small grains. And it's at the stage where it's dried down, and it's very clear that there's not a lot of weeds that are popping up through it, even though I know there's a ton of weed seeds in that field. And so they do a really great job competing with it, and that's why I always circle back to, if you're gonna take one thing out of it, it's grow a small grain. Put a small grain into your rotation. I cannot say it enough. Because this is what it could look like. This is our peas, and they were a failure. They got overrun by some of these weeds. We're adjusting our management. We're figuring out best management practices, figuring out how to grow these crops in Iowa is really our big goal. And so that's a field right next to it. So that's what it could have done. And we didn't do anything differently between these fields. The plant is doing that competition between the two. So you can see some overhead shots. There's some giant ragweed and some lamb's quarter in some of the soybeans. This is our weed control, a little bit of tine weeding, kind of disturbing the surface to get those weeds under control early on. You've bear with me now. This is where it comes to. So this is why you guys are here too. Is that okay? So we've got all these great benefits of crop diversity. Why isn't it happening? Well, markets. It is 100% the reason that people are not growing small grains or doing stuff besides corn and soybeans. And Cedar Rapids is a great example, a great metaphor for where our current agricultural system is right now. In Cedar Rapids, there are probably a dozen corn and soybean processing facilities from Cargill to the ethanol plants that a farmer can just drive 10 miles down the road, dump it off, get paid, all right, I'm done for the winter. It's super easy to do that. Yet in Cedar Rapids, we also have what I've heard is the biggest cereal plant in the whole world with Quaker. Where do they get their oats from? Canada. And so, they truck them in, or they bring them in on the train there. And same with, there's another smaller processing, I think it's like Treehouse, and they get the same train line. They're bringing these oats in from Canada. They're bringing their grains in from other spots. And so it just really kind of sums up our current system, that you have all these options to sell your corn and soybeans, but there's only sporadic buyers of small grains, peas, whatever these diverse alternative crops are across the Midwest. And that is 100% the reason why these farmers are not diversifying. We talk to farmers all the time, and they're like, I really want to diversify. And we go, why not? And they go, I have nowhere to sell it. And it happens over and over and over again. And so that's the message that I really want to bring to this crowd specifically, is that the farmers want to do it. And it's more than just pitching up a roadside stand and saying, okay, I'll buy that grain. There's a complicated process between where it gets on the farmer harvests it in their combine, and the point where we're eating it as bread. And there's all these steps in between, and that's part of this infrastructure that is missing. And so it's more than just saying, okay, there's a market like Quaker Oats that'll buy it, or any type of market that'll buy it. That grain has to be cleaned. A combine does a decent job getting a lot of the plant matter out of there, but there are still some non-edible debris, and we're talking about human food, that is in there. And so you have to go through other grain cleaning steps, such as filtering or screening. You can use air to kind of blow away the lighter or the heavier stuff, and so to really get that product to the point where it's only that wheat or only that oat or de-hulling one of the ancient grains or whatever it is. There's a lot of steps in between. And then you have this very clean grain that then can get turned into a flour or a cereal or whatever it is. And it's as much that infrastructure in the middle that is missing as much as anything. And I was hearing that same thing, and you guys have invested in your grain cleaner and seed cleaner, and that's part of it. And so what it really comes down to, and we've had these conversations with, smaller scale like Breadtopia up to, other people in Rodale talking with very large food processors, who I won't say their name currently, but the same conversation of those sellers, and I heard you mention this morning, I'm gonna throw you under the bus for it, but he was saying, well, we can't find someone to buy it, essentially, and you're looking for it, but you can't necessarily find it, and General Mills is saying that, or Quaker's saying that, whatever it is, they're saying, oh, we would buy it, but we don't have anyone to grow it for us. And then we talked to the farmer, and the farmer's like, I would love to grow it, but I can't find anyone to buy it. And it's just like, the Food System Coalition meeting that we were at a few weeks ago, I heard Hy-Vee say something super similar, where they were talking about, oh yeah, we have our homegrown produce, and we have this area in Iowa, and we want homegrown tomatoes, but we can't find anyone to grow them. And I'm like, yeah, I bet you I could go up to north, wherever that is in Iowa, spend 30 minutes on the ground and find a grower that would grow tomatoes for them. And that's where I get super frustrated, is that there's these voices on each end of the spectrum that are just not communicating to each other. And so part of it is investment and making these markets more available and making this infrastructure more available. But I guess why I'm here having this conversation is, as we've kind of started to see ourselves a little bit as the middleman, of that we work with people across the agricultural community. We specifically spend a lot of time working with farmers and putting our research to work and educating them on best management practices and how to grow these grains effectively. But we're also working with stakeholders and other investment people as well. And so that's really the big point here, is that all these voices are saying the same thing. We just need to get people into the same room, and we really need to start building up that infrastructure, because our kind of big ag industry policies have left this void of the smaller scale infrastructure, and that's where I see the most potential. And I can tell you, the farmers want to grow these crops, they just need some third party to get in there and help them take that risk. The farmers have a risky job as it is. They don't need to take on the added risk of trying to develop these things, and that's where somebody else needs to step in. And so, yeah, I will leave it in there in the interest of time. Just leave that slide right up there. Actually, let me get some resources here. So that's my contact information. I got some business cards. Feel free to grab them. We have consultants that work with farmers. This is our Midwest Center webpage. You can sign up to see some of our activities. So I'll leave that up there for you. But I just want to thank you to everybody for giving me an opportunity to speak with you and letting me gripe about our current agricultural system. And it's nice to be in a room with some like-minded folks. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I don't even get a chance to ask her questions, and we've got Stuart's jumping on it right away. So go ahead, Stuart.
I think before the oldest profession, there was actually an even older profession for community building, which is the honest broker that connects buyer and seller. And I'm curious what the state of these niche brokers are throughout the Midwest for these specialty grains. Small grain brokers, is that very well developed? And I have this follow-on question. If I'm a farmer and I'm going to grow a couple of specialty grains, can I get crop insurance like the corn and bean guys do?
Okay, so the first one, I don't really have a good answer. I don't really know of some good brokers. I'm sure there's some out there that's a little bit outside of my expertise. I would say in general, the farmers I know who are doing these small grains are getting creative. And I think that was one of the slides I skipped over, is they're doing online direct consumer marketing. They're milling their own flour. They're finding other ways to skip that middleman because the infrastructure is not there. And what was your second question?
Crop insurance.
Oh.
You get insurance on small grains.
It's tricky. It's commodity favored. I think wheat is easier than some of the other ones, but the more niche you get with your crop, the more unlikely they are to insure it, and it's complicated with cover crops. Yeah, the Farm Bill needs to make some adjustments, and that's one that's, yeah. Absolutely. Yep, and that's a huge one.
Hey, Gilbert and Mike, I know you guys are not brokers and that you don't take a position, but you are middlemen. You guys want to come on and talk to us a little bit about what you do at National Farmers Organics?
Sure. Yeah, we are all cooperative marketing. As far as the brokers and the specialty grains, it is very, very challenging. I mean, the organic market right now really stinks, especially on the corn and soybean side of things, especially in the corn. I'll agree with you, Sean, on whatever works for the farmer system, but the infrastructure on the small grain side of things really is in need of improvement. This year they're having some quality issues with the wheat across the upper Midwest, a lot of vomotoxin out there, a lot of light test weight oats as well. It's been a challenge for things. And I know with the strong livestock market, there's been a lot of livestock sales. So, a lot of this, if it doesn't make feed grade, there's always an option to send it on the livestock feed market. And that market, is not very strong at all, unfortunately. So it is, we do cooperative marketing, our members, and we pool our bushels the best we can. And but it's this last 6 to 8 months has really been a challenge on the pricing side of things.
Jordy.
I'm actually a business broker, so I guess to answer the question, it's also a very niche market, but there's also a really big void because majority of business brokers are retiring as the median age is 60, and this problem of owners retiring is just going to get worse and worse, especially in the next couple of years, so huge opportunity there. My question is regarding greenhouses. Would it help if a farm wanted to install greenhouses for this type of farming or initiative?
For small grains, no. I think it's just the greenhouse would be too small. It would be, the bigger a greenhouse gets, the more vulnerable it is to some of our weather events. I think greenhouses are best really for more specialty crops.
All right, thank you.
Hey, could you repeat the question whenever somebody from the audience asked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was just asking about using greenhouses for some of these crops, for larger row crops, which wouldn't be too effective.
How do carbon credits fit into the equation? Is that even a viable option?
So yeah, he's asked about carbon credits. It's just not a viable option, I think, right now. I'm not a big fan of those systems the way they are. The soil is naturally in a state of flux, that carbon goes in, carbon goes out, and it's circling continuously. And so, I don't want to rain too much on that parade, but I think that the motivations need to be not towards getting money for the carbon, but improving stuff like soil health and water infiltration. That's where the true benefit is.
But if a farm can get funding through carbon credit because they're doing regenerative ag, isn't that helping them and kind of taking the place of the insurance?
So, okay, so let me rephrase it. So I totally agree that I think from the farmer's perspective, it's great. I think that if they can make money to have good practices and put carbon in the soil, that's great. I'm all for the farmers making some more money. from a is that carbon staying in the soil perspective, it's crazy to think that, you know, we're going to pay someone to put carbon in now when 10 years from now, when they sell that land to somebody else and they till it up and that carbon leaves the soil, that we rewarded somebody and then this person just, you know, destroyed all that progress. So I think if we're going to incentivize farmers to do practices that sequester carbon, we should sequester the process of it and not necessarily measure the carbon that's going into the system. Yeah, and so in that sense, yeah, it is more about rewarding their process and their management instead of that outcome, and I think that's a better approach to it.
How do you reward that process?
You know, I'm not enough of an expertise into the way that would be rewarded. I think that just generally, you know, having more support from the government in the way they support like crop insurance and some of this stuff, it would be nice to expand that pool of money to support cover crop. And even then, like not even necessarily paying that, you know, let me rephrase this, just a cover crop cost share program is a great way to do it. Help the farmer pay for the cover crop. I think that's the best way to do those kind of things, is the cost shares.
Sean, isn't that what Indiana did? The Indiana legislature passed some laws that did exactly that. Now Indiana has, what, 40 or 50% cover crop, and we have a 90%? Is that accurate?
I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with Indiana. I'm barely familiar with Iowa at this point, but no, I'll take your word on it. Okay.
Indiana has a tremendous cover crop.
Okay, there you go.
And it's just because they share the cost.
Yep.
I heard also they had good leadership at the state level, DNR, that really helped facilitate it.
Good leadership at the top is always beneficial.
Simple question. Plot size for your small grain trials.
So the individual plots are about 1/10 of an acre. Those bigger rectangles that you could clearly see are about 2/3 of an acre because there's 6 individual plots in there. So
Okay.
There's limitations in terms of doing research on this at this angle, you know, where it's very controlled and we have, you know, very rigorous with replicates and whatnot. The downside is our plots are a little smaller. So my goal is to just be like, hey, this is what we're doing here. I want to see people do it on a field scale and see if they're getting comparable results.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
So in the livestock study, coming from a dairy farm background, how much are you measuring soil compaction?
That is a great question, and that's one that we do get commonly, is that is always a concern, is that there's going to be compaction in there. So we are doing it monthly over the course of the year across all the different plots of looking at the maximum compaction up to a depth of about 1.5 feet or so. But yeah, it's definitely a concern.
So what about varying, as you're varying your crops, varying your livestock?
What do you mean varying them?
Well, like say running goats, limited, depending on what goats eat, sheep,
Yep.
you know, other livestock to see what that.
So no, it's a great comment, and that was actually one of my slides, that it was like, we're focused on just cattle. Logistically, that's really all we can do, is just bring some cattle in for, you know, a couple months at a time. There are neighbors' cattle that we're borrowing from them as well. But yeah, doing multiple types of livestock with goats, sheep, cattle, chickens, whatever it is. It's one of the slides I talked about that I skipped is it's kind of what I said too. It's like, it doesn't even matter what it is, just diversify in some way, like bring more life into these systems, bring different types of crops in. The synergy that all of these different organisms and plants have with each other is something that we can never replicate. And so we just let nature do her thing, and that's the best thing we can do, is just kind of get out of the way. And we do that by bringing in this diversity.
Clearly, this community is passionate about regenerative ag. I can't thank you enough. This has been very, very informative, Sean. Let's give him one more round.